and it's a pleasure to be speaking to such a great audience on such a wonderful topic, and the theme of this event is crucial, not just at this particular juncture, but for generations and decades to come. And I think from the air cargo industry perspective, we take the same view. The global economy is very much about interconnecting communities around the planet. And the last 20 months have shown how we need to interconnect those communities, first by producing PPE and moving it around the world in unprecedented fashion. Then, of course, it's about moving medical supplies and treatment programs. And more recently, and I think we'll hear from one of our esteemed panelists, about moving the vaccines. And these are just human aspects of the global supply chain, but there are other aspects of the global supply chain, which is the role that we play in supporting developing economies. When we have situations where the UN Sustainable Development Goals is focusing on, as it were, equity amongst all members of the global community and global society, air cargo is there to support whether or not it's fresh produce, supply chain components from being manufactured all around the world and being transported to the ultimate consumer. So I think the way that the air cargo industry has actually developed over the last few decades is very much about supporting the global economy and the global community. And when it comes to a value perspective, and forgive me just for throwing in a percentage here or a number, air cargo, and this is a number that surprises many, only transports about 1% of global trade by volume, but 35% by value, which just goes to show that the air cargo supply chain is there to move the most time-sensitive, high-value, time-critical products that there is moving around the global economy. I mean, that's a great question. And I think if we look at pre-COVID times, one thing that we need to understand is about 50% of the global air cargo moved in the bellies of passenger aircraft. So, as Joss was saying, when we got to the middle of March last year, and basically the world's passenger fleet was grounded, that meant that 16,000 aircraft where cargo could actually fly on normally no longer was available. Freighters took up a lot of that slack, but also what airlines did, which was very innovative, is they actually started operating passenger aircraft for cargo only. There was about 3,000 passenger aircraft utilized in that fashion. Of those, there were about 300 or 400 which had the seats completely removed, which then created two things. One, a very innovative spirit, created a little bit of a problem for the ground handlers when they'd arrive at an airport, and instead of seeing 275 passengers that would walk themselves off a 777, they now saw 4,000 boxes, which were basically being very rude and just sitting there, waiting for somebody to take them off. So the industry was made aware of the fact that the two models were separate. For the first 100 years of this industry, it was pretty much passenger aircraft that were then sometimes built in a cargo configuration, but it was the same asset. So when the industry realized that both passenger and cargo industries were different, the governments need to also respond to that. Right now, I think we have a huge crisis that the industry is facing because of lack of harmonization across governments. Since August, I've been flying pretty much consistently. I've been to 18 countries. If I were to open my phone, you'd see 12 different apps that I've had to download for every country I fly from. I've had 16 PCR tests, 32 antigen tests. I've had to fill out thousands of pieces of paper, which you fill them out and then nobody asks them from you. So you filled them out for no reason whatsoever. But that lack of harmonization means that it's very difficult for the passenger networks to resume. If you don't have the networks being resumed, you can't have that cargo capacity that's so crucial. So I think there's one immediate thing governments can take, which is to look at harmonizing the restart and the recovery of the passenger industry. But then longer term, I think governments need to look at things like the international regulatory regime and say that these wonderful freighters, and again, I'm going to add my voice to those already expressed, Turkish Airlines, wonderful airline, great combination of freighter fleet as well as great passenger aircraft. But one thing that we have to recognize that air cargo moves in one direction. Passengers mostly go and come back. So to make a freighter fleet viable, you need to be able to move that aircraft where the cargo demand is in a timely fashion. We need an international regulatory regime which has, and forgive me for getting technical, for something called seventh freedom, which gives the airlines the access and the ability to move aircraft where they're needed, so they can actually fly to wonderful airports like Maastricht, so they can provide the capacity, so that ISOM's members can actually go to all of the customers, so that Joe and his businesses can have the right access to the right capacity. And that really helps support the theme of this conference, because efficient and optimized utilization of assets is the most green, efficient way to use those assets. So there's lots of things I think governments can do. Did you say 1 hour to answer that question?
Yes.
Oh, 1 hour or 1 minute? First of all, I think, as we've said, Turkey is the center of the planet, no matter which map you look at, other than the maps designed by the UK, obviously, where Great Britain tends to be a little bit too large and a little bit too central. But most normal maps would actually show that Turkey is incredibly well positioned for the global economy and global trade flows. You've got great ports, you've got a great airline, you've got great airports, you've got a wonderful, young, educated, technically connected workforce. You've got a destination which people want to come to, whether or not it's the beaches or the culture. So you've got a destination. You've got a thriving manufacturing industry. You've got global leading textiles and other products that you actually produce. But there is a risk. That's the plus. And now forgive me for the risk. The risk is, and I'm going to actually link to the World Bank. Every 2 years, the World Bank produces a study called the Logistics Performance Indicator, the LPI, where they actually measure and go through a very detailed study of looking at a country's infrastructure, customs procedures, connectivity, education, training, all the factors which actually implement this or impact the supply chain. And in 2012, Turkey, which is a solid G20 member, was ranked number 27. In 2014, it was ranked number 31. In 2016, it was 37. And in 2018, it was ranked 47. Sadly, that to me is a risk. And again, if you're saying addressing to the people in this audience and people beyond this audience, elsewhere in the country, as the global supply chains are moving ever more increasingly to high quality, high tech, high sensitive, digitally connected supply chains, as time is becoming increasingly important, we look at e-commerce. E-commerce is not about waiting till next week, it's about waiting till yesterday. And my daughter, who I think is accounting for about 50% of the global e-commerce trade increase, she doesn't understand why she can't have it on the same day from halfway around the world. She doesn't quite understand time zones. She's only 3, but that's another story. Actually, she's 27. She should understand time zones. So I think, putting aside the levity, the challenge to the people in this room is never rest on your laurels. The rest of the world has caught up in some cases and overtaken. You've got a world-class airline. Let's make sure that we can have a world-class infrastructure. You've got wonderful freight forwarders. I've worked very closely. You've got manufacturers, etc. But I think you need to make sure that the entire ecosystem, governments, regulatory agencies, airport authorities, suppliers, etc., are all working much more collaboratively to make sure you can leverage the assets that you've got.